I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Happy holidays. On this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from returning guest and film journalist Corey Attad. And you'll hear Corey and I talk about last week's acquisition by Netflix of Warner Brothers. Well, they've acquired exclusive bidding rights. And now Paramount Skydance, run by the controversial David Ellison, is attempting a hostile takeover bid, going directly to shareholders in order to stop the Netflix acquisition. There's a lot of concern over the future of movie theaters and also physical media with regards to Netflix having Warner Brothers, and there's political concerns many have about David Ellison and Paramount Skydance acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery due to the Ellison family's closeness to Donald Trump. This episode will largely focus, however, on what all of this means for the future of cinema and how the Warner Brothers situation ties into the problem of monopoly capitalism in the 21st century, as well as the way in which the death of theaters could lead to further atomization within our society. All that and more on this edition of Parallax Views. Before we get to the conversation with Corey Attad, I'd like to remind you that this listener is pretty much entirely listener funded, with the exception of my one sponsor, Mike Swanson of Wall Street Window. I'm hoping to bring in more sponsors in the future to make this program more sustainable. I've been doing this for a number of years now, but it becomes harder every year, taking care of family issues and whatnot, and of course there's rising prices. So with that being said, at this point I'd like to ask you to support me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. I try to do something different with this show. It's not really about super short talking point, sort of back and forth. I really try to let my guests speak, and I try to ask questions that will illuminate various subject matter for my listeners, and I hope I've been doing that for you over all these years. So please, if you support the work I do, support me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. I'm going to be doing a Parallax Vlog solo video every so often now, in addition to the Parallax Vlog with C. Derek Varn that is up on the Patreon for Patreon supporters. So more goodies on the way for Patreon supporters. Also, be sure to check out wallstreetwindow.com. That's the website of Mike Swanson, who does really, really great work when it comes to tracking all the latest financial and trading news. I've actually had listeners make a return on investment through Mike's trading tips. So please consider heading on over to wallstreetwindow.com, subscribe to his newsletter, and I believe you can also get his free ebook, The Twofold Formula, the single best trading pattern I have ever used. Once again, that's wallstreetwindow.com. And with that being said, let's get to the conversation with Corey Attad. Welcome back to Parallax Views. The guest that I'm very, very happy to have on. We're going to be talking about the Netflix acquisition of Warner Brothers, although who knows, Paramount may get it. I mean, everything is moving so quickly. Welcome back to the show, freelance writer Corey Attad, who has written for such publications as Esquire and the Baffler magazine, actually. And we may be talking about his article from Baffler from a few years back entitled The Netflix Twitter Complex in this conversation. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Times a bit better. I'm a bit gutted by this news of Netflix and Paramount and Warner Brothers.
Yeah, I think I've gone through like a bunch of stages of reaction to it, where like now I'm a little bit more zen. I'm kind of like, whatever happens with it, it's going to take some time. So like any disaster befalling us, I don't need to freak out quite yet, you know?
Well, I actually initially contacted you because I think you had a very Parallax Views type take on this. Because a lot of people are saying, well, Netflix is the best of bad options. And you said that you're not necessarily convinced of that a few days ago. Maybe you could take us through why Netflix acquiring Warner Brothers may not be the best option.
Um, well, okay. The best, just to be clear about something, the best option is that Warner Brothers is not sold. And I think that any conversation about this needs to actually start from that.
But can I interject there?
Or sorry, did I say Netflix? I meant Warner Brothers.
No, no, you said I think you said Warner Brothers, but what I just wanted to interject and say I
Mm,
essentially agree with there's this anti-monopoly commentator by the name of Matt Stoller who has
mm,
basically said the same thing.
mhm.
This it shouldn't be sold off at all. This is bad for competition, and I basically agree with that. That's my
Yeah,
view. I think this is
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
monopoly everywhere.
Yeah, and to make that even more true, we're talking about a company that actually is doing quite well. The problem that Warner Brothers has is not that Warner Brothers is doing badly. It's that Warner Brothers, unfortunately, at the moment is, a company, it's an old studio. It's over a century old. And at some point, I forget when it was, maybe in the 70s or so, when, Hollywood was going through a different kind of era of collapse. It started getting sold off to telecom companies and various other things. At one point it was Time Warner, and then it was AOL Time Warner. I don't know. There's like been a million iterations where essentially you have this quite storied and productive film studio and television studio, um, essentially being passed around through a series of mergers, of big conglomerates who expect massive returns. The bigger thing, though, is that especially in the most recent acquisition, which was the merger with Discovery, they took on a ton of debt, and that kind of lays the groundwork for what's going on now, which is that the CEO David Zaslav, had been essentially pushing a plan to split the company in two and spin off all the Discovery assets, which is mostly cable channels, CNN and Discovery and a bunch of other things, and essentially load all of the debt onto those companies and either let them fail or let them, go through a bankruptcy and get sold off for parts. But basically, kind of saying like that's stuff that we don't care about. The main productive part of the company is the studio. It's the television production studio and HBO. And those are the things that Netflix is trying to buy right now. Um, at the same time, you had, and in fact, the bidding war that Netflix was involved in was kickstarted by Paramount kind of sensing blood in the water and David Ellison deciding to try to essentially unsolicited make an offer to purchase the entire company, including all the Discovery assets and all the debt, in order to also have CNN, because of course Ellison wants to have an ideological, he wants to do what he's doing with CBS News. So all of that's very complicated. Also, Comcast was in the mix. They're close to the end. They own NBC and Universal. I actually think that of the three, that would have been the most um, not sensible, but kind of the best of the three bad options. Um, Mostly because I don't like any of the options, but I trust the people at Universal the most. Uh,
Well, they're already working with Warner Brothers on what is it? Studio distribution services, Groove.
yes, that's the physical media
Yes, yeah.
production. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, they work with all the other studios on that too. I think they co-own it with Universal, and then they work with a bunch of the other studios to produce Blu-rays and things like that. Um, all of that preamble, and we could go into the weeds on that till the cows come home. But it all leads up to the announcement that Netflix and Warner had agreed to to an acquisition. And to me, the problem, look, I think that Paramount, people's fears about Paramount are also a monopolistic fear and also a fear of consolidation and all the jobs lost that'll come from consolidation, and especially in an industry that's already having trouble, especially in movie theaters, um, to consolidate even further reduces the pool of stuff being made. It's not great. And then you throw in all the Trump stuff and you're like, this is terrible. But I'm sort of the opinion that, frankly, I don't care about CNN. I don't think anybody particularly cares about CNN. I know that those stations have a big influence to some degree, but that's not where the majority of politics is happening anymore. And
Well, especially not for younger people, I think.
especially not for younger people. And frankly, you know, the politics change. The political ground can shift. Right now, Ellison is trying to do whatever right-wing stuff he's doing, but like, who knows what happens in a few years if there's a different president and the lay of the land changes. Whereas to me, it's much more important to think about this in sort of a medium and long-term way. What will this mean for the entertainment industry, for the media industry, and quite frankly, for industry writ large in America and in the world? I mean, I'm in Canada, so it's like, there's implications we can talk about for Canada, and other countries, that if Paramount buys the company, really all you're doing is losing a studio. Whereas when Netflix buys the company, you're talking about what essentially is the cementing of a shift in the entire landscape of entertainment production and distribution, globally, frankly. Netflix is the biggest streamer globally by far. Warner Brothers is one of the biggest studios, and they also own HBO Max, which is one of the biggest streamers in the United States. They're also one of the biggest names in television globally, both in terms of production and licensing. They have brand deals all over the world. They have an immense library that they do put out on physical media. In fact, Warner Brothers has been one of the most consistent about putting their library out on physical media. All of that stuff could potentially go away under a Netflix arrangement, because Netflix, up until now, has shown not only no interest in movie theaters, or little interest in movie theaters, no interest in physical media, no interest certainly in licensing out content to other stations globally or elsewhere.
I know I'm going to have at least one listener try to push back now on one thing. They're going to
On which
say,
thing?
well, they're going to say, oh, well, Del Toro's Frankenstein is getting a release on Criterion. And I'm like, but these are like exceptions to the rule.
Yes. In fact, there was a point where Criterion and Netflix had announced a deal, and they did release a few titles. They released The Irishman and Marriage Story and a few titles. There were some that they announced that didn't end up coming out because that deal seems to have fallen apart. And the only people who've gotten releases have, I think it's been Del Toro. He got Pinocchio on there, and I think that's purely just because he's sort of has enough clout that he was able to kind of push them to do it. I would expect, for example, Criterion at some point will get the short films that Wes Anderson made, the Roald Dahl short films as well. But those are such minor things, right? And I think that the important thing to do when assessing all of this is to kind of take a wider view of things. We can get into the weeds on stuff, and we will, and I'm happy to. But as sort of a general matter, what you have to do is look at a situation where you have a company who, until now, their entire mission has been, what amounts to Silicon Valley disruption. And, disruption is basically a nice word for, we're going to destroy everything that currently exists and replace it with something new that we control. completely. That's the Silicon Valley mindset. That's how Netflix has operated until now. And this would put them in a greater position to have, certainly within Hollywood, an almost like the only company that would come close in terms of an ability to both compete and also affect the industry is Disney, who themselves at this point are halfway a a Silicon Valley company. That's the thing here, right? Is that this would mark the official turnover of Hollywood into a Silicon Valley enterprise. Um, Disney with its streaming, MGM now under Amazon, they have James Bond and everything. Paramount has its own streaming aims. Like basically what you're talking about is a total shift in the marketplace and a consolidation within a company that would be so powerful that they could, start to dictate terms in a way that they until now haven't quite been able to. They've done a lot, but they can do more and they might do more. And that's I think that's scary, certainly for anybody working within the industry. And I think that it raises a lot of concerns, again, monopoly concerns about how you deal with an entity that big and that powerful. Um, yeah, that's kind of it.
Well,
Everything else
so
is detail, right?
let's dig into the weeds a little bit. I know I believe the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild are both very upset about this. I
Mhm.
know that Christopher Nolan and the directors are very worried about this and voicing concerns.
Mhm.
Why would say any of these groups be voicing concerns? I specifically want to get into the Actors Guild because I know that there's been actors who have said that they don't really get residuals from the streaming on Netflix.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the actors. Like you said, it's the writers, the Directors Guild, who Christopher Nolan is sort of the recently elected president of. Um, it's also, by the way, I don't know if the Producers Guild came out with a statement, but I'm pretty sure the producers are also very miffed about this,
And I was right
because
about the Writers Guild too, right?
yes, 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 yes. Basically everybody in Hollywood is against this, and the reason is because, well, there's a bunch of reasons. Some of it is not to trivialize it, but I think aesthetic, right? You're talking about artists at the end of the day. Even the producers, they like to think of themselves as making art, and you know, they like the idea of their movies being in theaters. They like the idea of the romance of Hollywood. That's why they went to Hollywood, and the idea that like reminds me of Christopher Nolan at some point, when he was still working with Warner Brothers, or maybe it was after he left Warner Brothers, but Warner Brothers had kind of made the shift into HBO Max and were during the pandemic releasing movies day and date. And he was basically like, there's a lot of filmmakers who went to Warner Brothers thinking they were working for the best studio, and it turned out they were working for the worst streamer. And that's how people feel about it. And I think that's um, it's a little bit more than aesthetic in that it actually affects how people conceive of the job that they're doing. Um, that affects the art, it affects the product, right? And this is the thing is we can get romantic about art, but in monopoly terms, it's a product that's being sold to customers. And I think one of the purposes of antitrust law is to make sure that products are good for consumers, not just good prices, but actually good quality, right? It's about competition leading to better things and better value and um, a better world, essentially. And instead, what we have is sort of more and more consolidation that allows companies to do less and less. And all of us are just kind of like, well, it's convenient and I do like watching stuff on my couch, so I guess I'll keep paying when Netflix keeps upping the price on me, right? Like they're sort of taking advantage of the power and consolidation that they have. The other part of it, and this is more on the labor end, is the issue of things like residuals and royalty payments and just generally the kinds of deals that are struck that spread the wealth around. And you have to understand some of these people. I had heard, I was listening to The Big Picture yesterday. Sean Fennessy was talking about all of this, and he made the point that part of Netflix's goal, and it's part of the goal of any monopolistic enterprise, and frankly, any of these corporations who dream of being monopolies, is to cut out all the middlemen so that they control every aspect of production and distribution. And the reason that they do that is not just so that they have control, right? It's so that they don't have to share in the profits that they're making. When they sell a product, or if they have to deal with movie theaters, they have to split money with movie theaters. Well, as Fennessy kind of said, like, especially if now they're in the theatrical business with Warner Brothers, maybe they'll just decide to buy movie theaters, and who knows, under Trump, maybe that'll be allowed. And then they get to, they would love that, because however they would structure the payment, they would get the money, right? That's their whole thing. And what that means is cutting out other people, right? And what, this is what led to the strikes, the Writers and Actors Guild strikes a couple of years ago. It was this, right? It was this idea that an industry had been built on a certain model that, however problematic and exploitative it was, it did spread the wealth more than the streaming environment did. And so now you have writers who are going like, not only are there going to be less studios to sell my pitches to, I'm not going to get paid as much for them. Or maybe I'll get a little bit more up front, but I'm not going to get sustainable wages in the long term. That also begins to kill the industry. It kills the availability of talent. That makes the product worse, right? It makes it less diverse usually, which is problematic again in other ways. There's nothing good comes out of monopolization, right? And it's not good for labor, and it's not good for consumers. Now,
I was going to say it's one of the ironies, I think, of capitalism, right? There's that contradiction where, well, capitalism wants competition, but these companies don't want competition. I mean, it's
nobody wants competition. If you tell somebody you get to have total control of a market and make all the profits from that market, like, who's going to say no to that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. Like, of course the logic holds, but that's why you need regulation and laws and that. But, apparently we're in the Wild West and none of it matters. And, to me, that's why to me, I bring it back to the monopolization issue, because, we can, for example, and maybe we should talk about this now, is like the issue of movie theaters and what movie theaters mean. And the idea that maybe movie theaters will die. Now, Ted Sarandos has sort of tried haphazardly to like allay people's fears about the death of theatrical. He's sort of on day one, he did put out a statement, or there was a quote that I think he intended to calm fears, but people took the opposite way, because he's like, oh, we're still going to be doing theatrical. That's why we bought Warner Brothers. But, the theatrical exclusivity windows are probably going to come down and that kind of stuff. And, that's really bad. Now, yesterday I read another interview with him where let's say what he was saying was a little bit more, I don't know if I believe him, but I think I understand what he's saying, is that, they bought these businesses, or they want to buy these businesses in order to buy the businesses, right? Now, that's not obvious, because from a logical standpoint, especially in a competitive environment, you know, the reason they're buying Warner Brothers is to take Warner Brothers off the table. It's to eliminate a competitor. It's to control more of the market share. But it does need to be admitted that like the business that Warner Brothers is in is not exactly the same
It's
business
not
that
exactly the same as Netflix. That's the argument I keep hearing from people that aren't as worried about this. They'll say to me, well, maybe Netflix will expand its business operations or let Warner do what it wants, you know?
right. And I think to that point, you know, Netflix also has a lot of debt. Now they're servicing the debt. They have no problems doing that because they make a lot of money in profits off of their subscription service. But the truth is, almost all of their money comes from the subscription service. And you know, and I know that like it's great to have a really, really big business, but it's problematic when that business is relying on one income stream. You want to diversify. And for as much as Netflix has been anti-movie theater, you know, part of the reason for that is that they did not have a theatrical distribution arm, and it's not exactly easy to just build one, right? You can look for even for as big as they are. You can look at Apple, for example. They're a huge company. They, in fact, were working with studios to distribute their movies in theaters. Warner Brothers distributed F1 this summer, you know, so it's not easy for a company like Netflix to just suddenly burst into theatrical. And I imagine that there is there's some thought genuinely within the company of saying, you know, movies still do make billions of dollars per year. This is just more money for us. And then you take into account that it's not just the movie theaters, right? You're talking about HBO Max, and you know, they've kind of said that HBO Max will still be HBO, and HBO Max will be its own thing. That maybe there will be some sort of somewhat combined streaming service, or maybe it'll be a tier or something like that. Again, there's some details in there that we would need to talk about. But if they're serious about that, right, that's a lot of money. You know, HBO licenses all over the world, right? You go around the world, there in European countries, there are HBOs in Europe that are like partly owned by Warner or sometimes not owned by Warner, but are licensed. And so Warner's getting a lot of money from them. There's all the cable subscriptions, obviously, and that's a lot of money. You know, there's the TV production, right? Warner Brothers produces television for Netflix, right? Warner Brothers produces television for everybody. They're maybe the best and biggest TV production in the business. And I could totally see Netflix looking at that and being like, hey, that's good money. Like we're not going to stop that. You know, now the fear, of course, is that they would stop that. That what they would realize is like, hey, for as much money as we can make from that, if we just fold it all into Netflix, if we just say Warner Brothers Television only produces Netflix shows now, and the benefit is that we get higher quality television, then maybe we can up our subscription prices even more. You know, all of this would need to be a wait and see kind of thing, or it would need to be regulated to force them to do that. Or you go back to my thing, which is like that nobody needs to buy this company at all. But again, putting that aside. So yeah, it's a tricky.
Real quick. Well,
Yeah.
go on. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you. I mean, you said that a bunch of the discovery sort of side of this will get spun
Mhm.
off.
Mhm.
So, are some of the concerns about CNN? I mean, are people just assuming that CNN will do well for itself outside of Warner Brothers? Like, I mean, what I'm saying is,
No,
could these?
the opposite. It's actually the
Okay.
opposite. Like from my understanding is that um, the look, it's hard to know exactly what the intentions are because there's also people who've said that, you know, the entire point of Zaslav even bringing about the idea to split the company was to drive interest in a sale of Warner Brothers. So there's all kinds of complications in this. But if you take it kind of just straight, what this spinning off would do is it's not just spinning off those assets, it's spinning them off with the debt. And that's billions of dollars in debt. So
Well,
at that
that's what I
point,
mean. Does something like CNN get screwed either way, whether it's Paramount or Netflix potentially,
I think
or is that at least possible? I don't know.
I think it depends on what you mean by screwed. I
Okay.
think I think if what you mean is it's going to turn into a right-wing cesspit, then yeah, under Paramount it will be screwed. But again, who knows if that'll happen and who knows how temporary that would be or who like it's hard to say. I imagine that it would suck, but okay, so we lose CNN as a trusted news source to the degree that they have been one. I think the plan to split, which would still happen essentially under the Netflix arrangement, um, at that point, you're saddling CNN and Discovery and a bunch of those with a bunch of debt that would almost certainly send them into bankruptcy. Like, there's no way anybody would want to buy a bunch of debt-ridden assets that have not great value compared to the debt, right? Like, it's just hard to imagine that. So probably you go through a bankruptcy filing and then those brands get sold off and then maybe Ellison buys it. But at that point, it's like a different channel. Like, so yeah, it's hard to look at the situation and go, CNN is going to be in a good spot after this. I imagine Discovery would be a stronger asset for somebody to pick up, but it's really hard to say. Um, you know, to be honest, I'm not super concerned about that because more than film, I think it's very easy to accept that like cable is dying and
Well,
cable
there's a new news media environment.
yeah, there's a new news media environment, and again, I'm factoring in Discovery here too, right? Where it's like those are beloved channels, and brands, right? Like around the world, they do a lot of good work. Less lately because it's mostly like reality nonsense, but they still have Shark Week, I guess. The the thing the thing to me about it is that if those are going to continue to exist, they're going to have to shift radically anyway, right? I don't feel the same way about movie theaters because the difference is that Discovery Channel versus Discovery streaming, it's still a bunch of crap that's coming on your TV. Whereas movie theaters are actually a distinct business. You leave your home and go to them. So the question of what happens to movie theaters is important in that you could actually be losing something much more material. And frankly, movie theaters sustain that's a big industry. Not just the theaters themselves, but again, what they facilitate in terms of production, not just from the studios, right? You're
Can I
talking
comment on that
about,
real quick?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I don't think people realize that. I will go down to in Tampa. Uh, there's an independent theater called the Sunray
Yeah.
Cinema, and they show a lot of independent movies. They've had John Waters there, and it's in a mall. And people
Hmm.
think, well, no one goes to malls anymore. That theater brings people to that mall, and they go shopping at that mall before they
Hmm.
go to see the movie or to meet John Waters or to meet Crispin Glover. He was there this week. It helps businesses in the local community.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a whole conversation about brick and mortar and building out third spaces and all these things, right? Like this is the thing is you when you're talking about Netflix and their involvement in this, you really are talking about existential changes within not just industries, but how we interact with the culture around us. And and
Is that an
one
even
way
bigger concern for you than the sort of economic aspects?
I think they're the same thing.
Okay, okay.
I think they're the same thing because I've long had this kind of bugbear about um, entertainment and media and the way that it's reported on, where, because it's culture and seen by many as frivolous, even when it's good, there's something frivolous about it. It's not medicine, it's not, agriculture or whatever. But you're talking about billions and billions of dollars a year. That money is not coming from nowhere. Those are things that people, human beings, value. People don't just want to work all day and then die, right? They want to experience life. They want to interact with art. They want to interact with other people. They want to they want to do things that enrich their lives. Now, not all of that is media-based entertainment, but a lot of it is. There's a lot of value in that. That's why Netflix is willing to pay almost $100 billion for a company, right? Like that's how much money we're talking about. Those are people who are employed. So there's that economic factor. There's a political dynamic, not just because of the questions about Ellison and all of that, but because of the way that these corporations are able to interact then with politics and shape the world around us, right? Like part of the reason that we're even having this conversation is that to whatever degree the 20th century developed a bunch of trust busting regulations, they've all been, systematically destroyed over the last few decades. And that's because these companies are so huge and they're able to affect the laws, right? And so look, another way of thinking about this is forget Netflix. Let's just talk about the general decline of movie going, which was happening before streaming. Okay. Now, a lot of it was just down to the fact that TV existed, and so you could rent and video, whether it was VHS or DVD afterward, came in, and so you could watch stuff at home. So obviously, there's just a direct competition related to convenience. It's more convenient and cheaper to just watch stuff at home. But people still had an idea of like going to the movies, right? That's really where you interact with the art form of cinema. Watching something on your TV is a compromised version of the ideal. But over time, due to those giant conglomerates buying up these studios, the expectations for profits grew and grew. You had the studios realizing and their owners realizing, whoa, there's a lot of money to be made with movies globally, not just releasing them in America, that we can wide release a movie on like 20,000 screens or whatever it is around the world and just make, I don't know, like Zootopia's already made almost $1 billion. It's been out for like a week and a half. Like where that's enormous profit potential. And so what you had was basically all of these studios, all of these companies chasing that kind of growth, right? What did that do? Okay. Functionally speaking, it placed a premium within these corporations on giant spectacle entertainment. It's not that giant blockbusters didn't exist before. They always existed, right? You go back to Cecil B. DeMille. It's just that, that was maybe the like 3 or 4 movies a year at best that a studio was willing to go all in on. And the rest of it was just like, we're providing a whole bunch of entertainment at a range of budgets. Studios released sometimes dozens of movies a year. Now studios release, if you're lucky, like 8 movies a year. And most of them are giant movies that all need to perform at huge, you've created a dynamic where these companies are more and more reliant on a thing that's less and less stable. And on top of that, what you've done is you've trained the audience over decades again to understand movie going as only valuable when it's a giant event spectacle. And that has only accelerated post COVID and post streaming or whatever in the streaming era. And you know, as a cinephile, that's really depressing. And it's been depressing for a long time. It's depressing to me that, like, you know, I'll tell somebody about some cool movie, and you know, the answer is always just like, oh, okay, you know, I haven't heard of that. Maybe I'll go see it. Maybe I'll see it on streaming. Maybe, right? If they happen to subscribe to the streaming service that it shows up on. And you know, that sucks because it's like people denying themselves good art. It denies culture, right? It denies my ability to have a conversation with somebody and have cultural touch points that we relate to. You know, instead, all we relate to is, have you seen this? Oh, no, I should check that out. Have you seen this? Oh, no, I should also check that out. And it's like, how do you build a society like that way?
Yeah,
Right.
it's sort of like we're more hyper atomized by all of this in a weird way.
Yeah, but that's by design, you know. Now, I don't think that the CEO of Netflix is sitting there and, you know, in some Machiavellian way
Yeah, he's
going
not
like,
like
how do
rubbing
I
his hands together. You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's not going like, "Oh, I what I really want to do with my life is destroy the fabric of society." Right? Like that's not what these people are after. It's just that, you know, they're after profits, and the problem with chasing profits that way is that it's antisocial, you know. Um so that's why I say it's all one thing, right? The economics um, are driving the politics, are driving the culture, and it's scary to think that, you know, that will only get worse. That did you ever read Cloud Atlas?
No, I haven't.
There's this great kind of running thing in that book where part of it is set very, very far into the future at a time when all media kind of video entertainment, I guess, that exists are just called Disney's, right? Just imagining that Disney just took over the market like Kleenex did or something. But the thing with Kleenex is that that's a very basic product, right? Whereas like Disney, you know, they're producing all kinds of different movies, and the idea that, you know, you would have a future of that level of homogenization, of that level of control by one company where you're basically just left to hope that they do good for you. That's not what you want to, that's not the situation you want to be in. Like I would love it genuinely if Netflix buys Warner Brothers and they genuinely do just say, man, this is a good business to be in. We're just going to have this as a subsidiary company that does what they do. Like many giant corporate, like GE has a bunch of subsidiaries. I would love it if they look at HBO and go, man, that's a really good business and it brings in revenue and we don't want to like fuck it up. Like we're just going to keep it going the way that it's going. I don't necessarily believe that will happen. I don't believe that, like, even to the extent that it happens, it probably won't happen. You know, it won't be that great. It'll be like some halfway version. But the real issue is that we shouldn't need to hope, you know, we should just know that Warner Brothers will be a studio that keeps making movies. In fact, frankly, if it was up to me, we would be doing a whole bunch of other stuff. You know, I'm not in the States, but if I was in the States, I would be pushing, not that it would ever happen in the political climate that exists now, but like I would be pushing for much more public funding of movies, right? Of the creation of movies, not just through tax credits to fund local production, but actually helping to fund movies like they do in Europe and all of that, to give people who don't have access to the whims of CEOs in Hollywood some opportunity to produce culture. I would push for, you know, what amounts to a library system for theatrical exhibition that says, you know what? Movie going is kind of expensive. And in a market where there are cheaper and more convenient, not better, but convenient alternatives, right? People will naturally gravitate to the cheaper, convenient alternative. But what if you provided them theaters that were if not free, at least somehow subsidized in a way that they were cheaper. And frankly, make a law that forces studios to just give that content to those theaters for a cheap price, right? Like I would be looking at how you build a sustainable um, not industry so much, but a sustainable landscape for the production and distribution and community formation around cinema. And I think community formation is actually the other real piece of this. I mean, you were getting at it when you were mentioning the local theater near you that people come and see John Waters movies. You know, I'm in Toronto. We have a very vibrant rep cinema culture. From what I've seen around North America and in Europe, rep cinema has been growing quite a bit. People are literally going out and paying like $20 in Canada to see a movie that they could probably watch on Netflix. But, you know, the review cinema in Toronto brings like a 35 millimeter print of some movie. People line up and go see it. Those shows are sold out. And then they hang out afterward and they go grab beers and they make friends with the programmers and it pulls more and more people in. How you do that with new releases, not entirely clear to me, right? Rep Cinema has some advantages because there's some sense of like, well, this is a product that's existed for a while, and now what I'm doing is I'm paying it to experience it in a new way, or a way that I couldn't otherwise. The value proposition's a bit less when it's something brand new, where people are just like, is it a product I want to buy? Right? But community formation is what it's all about, right? Monopoly is something that exists against society. And we should be doing whatever we can to bolster and build society. So that has nothing to do, in my opinion, with like a personal care for movie theaters. You know, like this applies to other things. It applies to opera or whatever. The difference being that like opera is so antiquated at this point, you know, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. We still have movies. Like I said, people are going by the billions of dollars to go see Zootopia. There's potential there, right? You're not getting billions of money going to opera. And that to me is what's disappointing about what's happening right now. And look, like I said, it could be that, you know, in a few years when Netflix owns Warner Brothers, everything is basically fine in terms of the industry's chugging along. Warner Brothers is putting out 10 movies a year. HBO is still servicing deals, you know, all over the world. But that's still not, that's kind of a dystopia. You know what I mean? It's like,
It's not optimal. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you're basically kind of living in a world where you're like, well, my despotic leader is kind of giving me all the needs that I have, so I guess I can't complain, but he's still a dictator, and I can't really cross him. And the not crossing him is a huge issue because, for example, I've thought a lot about this here in Canada, particularly. Canada is like, you know, it's basically like three monopolies in a trench coat. Like our market is small enough, and yet, unlike a lot of European countries, we're too influenced by the United States. We like to think that we can operate things the way that the US does capitalistically. And so what you end up with is like a media industry that is dominated by essentially three companies who are also telecom company. So it's like literally you have in the most pertinent case is BCE, which owns Bell Canada, the telecom. That's ISP's cell phone, TV. They also own Bell Media, which produces television, also owns a bunch of TV channels, and also owns Canada's largest kind of homegrown streamer, Crave. And Crave is kind of the bedrock of Bell Media. And they're able to use their monopoly power through the telecom and all of that to get people to sign up for Crave. But even then, the real selling point of Crave is that they're the exclusive home in Canada of HBO content and a bunch of other content from the Warner Library through a deal that they have that I forget how long it's supposed to still go to, I don't know, 2030 or so. Um, what happens in Canada to our media ecosystem when the actual biggest streamer, Netflix, denies our biggest homegrown streamer uh, the HBO content? And then that streamer starts falling apart, which leads to a collapse of Bell Media, which screws up, Bell Canada. Now, that's a problem in Canada of the degree of consolidation and monopolization. So that needs to be fixed here, for those reasons. But then you see the implications of what happens when these monopolies interact with each other, right? And unfortunately, Netflix, just by dint of being American and being global, is much bigger. So they have more power. And then you factor in the fact that, like, to the degree that even Canadian regulators might have something to say about this merger, which they might, right? They might look at it and go, well, we'd like to put some rules on this acquisition, except that Netflix is deeply embedded in local Canadian film and television production, as they are in many countries around the world. If they say, they could say, if you start putting rules on us, sorry, Canada, your market's not big enough for us to justify continuing. We'll just leave. And then the government would have to go like, oh crap, sorry, we'll let you do what you want. Right now, again, I'm not saying that that is how things will play out, and I sincerely hope that they don't, but that's the level of power that you're talking about here.
Yeah, well, if I can interject on that, I mean, one of my big concerns is film preservation, right?
Yes.
So, to me, movies aren't just movies. I mean, they're part of our culture and our heritage. And I
Yes.
think without culture, we just devolve into barbarism, right? And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of great movies that, I'm not sure Netflix cares about a lot of films that are pre 1975. Um, so I don't know what happens to movies like The Wild Bunch or Bonnie
Look,
and Clyde.
it's possible. I'll try to be optimistic about it. Um, right now, Netflix doesn't care about those movies, primarily because they have to license them from other studios. That means that it costs them money to license. Uh, and if they don't see the return on the investment, why would they license? So old movies might be on, they could throw them on Netflix, but like if they're made before about 1990, nobody's clicking on them. Um, if they suddenly had access to Warner Brothers library, I could see them having success in a similar way that HBO Max has had, which is saying like part of the value add of our service is that you will have a channel that, like, apparently TCM is actually the one channel that is going to be kept as part of this deal. It's not going to be spun off. That's what I've heard. And I could see Netflix being like, we're going to have a TCM channel on Netflix. And now for the people who do want those films, they'll have access in an easy place. And it gives incentive to restore those films and make them available. But, the problem with that is like, again, there's the fear that you have a whole library of entertainment that's just locked behind the paywall that is Netflix.
Which is what has happened, I think, with Fox, 20th Century Fox, and when Disney acquired them.
To
To
some
some
degree,
extent. Yeah.
to some extent, I mean, they have put out discs and they have, there were fears when Disney bought Fox that because Disney is not so great about licensing for repertory screenings in theaters, that Fox would be shut down too. In fact, that hasn't been the case. And if anything, Disney, maybe because so much attention was paid to that problem, Disney has been more open lately about licensing. I never used to see a theater like the Review being able to license a Disney animated movie to screen, and now they have semi regularly. So you know, it's it's hard to know exactly how that plays out. I do think that there needs to be some attention paid to the fact that Warner Brothers in particular has been really, really adamant about archiving and restoring their films. Now, other studios have done this as well. I think Sony has been quite good about going through their back catalog. They also own a lot of stuff through the Columbia Pictures library. But Warner Brothers has Warner Archive, which basically does sort of what amount to print to order kind of Blu-rays. It's not literally print to order, but it's like they do small batch production. The benefit of Warner Archive is that it creates this incentive that Warner already has for a restoration scheme that they've undertaken in recent years, which is essentially restoring every single thing in their archive. And I don't think any other studio quite has what that operation is.
No,
So
I want to say this. Warner Archive is incredible.
It's an
Like,
incredible resource. And the one of the funny things with them is you used to hear it more a couple of years ago before they kind of explained what they're doing. But people would like look at Warner Archive and be like, why are they releasing this like, I don't know, old Western from like 1950, whatever, that nobody's even heard of? When there's other stuff in their library that's much bigger that they still have never released. And the reason is because they're actually going through their archive and first restoring, like they're restoring an order of a combination of what the value is for the customer, but also literally like, are these film materials going to die on us? So anything that needs restoration immediately in order to preserve, they're doing first. And that is not an obvious financial windfall. You know what I mean? And it's hard to know that Netflix would look at the operations of Warner Brothers and go like, this is still something that we care to spend that much money on. Now, again, by all accounts, Ted Sarandos, no matter his weird statements about movie theaters, is a movie fan. I'm sure he has some degree of respect for the idea that Warner Brothers is the biggest library and most impressive library in Hollywood. That's part of why he's buying them, right? So one would hope that he would see the value that we see and keep that going. Again, it gets us back to the we shouldn't have to hope thing, but that's one of those areas where if I'm being level-headed about stuff, I'm like, maybe they'll continue that. And by the way, speaking to the SDS thing, the physical media production that they have with Universal, never mind that they have that deal, I think also through 2030 or so for that company. There's no reason to think, or sorry, there's plenty of reason to think, but there's no reason that Warner Brother, or sorry, that Netflix couldn't look at this again as just a new business that they're in and be like, hey, if it's making money, why would we stop this? And in fact, maybe they would look at it and see, actually, now that we have this distribution arm and we are making some profit off of these releases, we could start putting out Netflix movies. Until now, they've sort of looked at the Netflix produced original content on their platform as like the sell for the platform. In part because they don't have a huge library of old stuff, right? So to them, it's like, we have all of this new stuff that we've produced and we need to attract people to come to our streaming service. If we start releasing Blu-rays and things, it's not that it's a huge business, but it's like, it would dilute the impression that the only place you can get Netflix content is on Netflix, right? Whereas if they suddenly own a literal Blu-ray production company, they might look at it and go, screw it. Like, people have been asking us for a release of all kinds of stuff. We could produce it and make some money off of it. It's very possible that that's what happens. Like I said, there's there's a version of the way that all of this plays out, that all of people's greatest fears about the specific things that would happen, the death of movies, the of movie theaters, the bad things about consolidation, all of that stuff. You could even imagine a situation where nobody gets laid off, or not a lot of people, like maybe some, whatever, around the edges. But basically, they're just like, no, Warner Brothers is its own studio. Why are we not going to fire anybody? Because they're just their own studio. They need all those people to produce stuff. I doubt that that's what would happen, but like, let's imagine that that's what happens, right? All the best possible outcomes of this happen. You're still left with a giant monopoly, right? It's
So that
it's a
for you is the
dangerous,
bigger issue beyond anything
yeah,
else.
it's a dangerous position to be in. It's like, even if everything is good, you're still on edge, right? And that to me is the meat of it. It's kind of the thing that I keep going back to, because my immediate reaction when the news dropped, I was just like, oh, great, that's it. They've killed Hollywood.
Yeah, I was going to say you seem a little bit more, maybe not optimistic, but not. It seemed like you were pretty upset when the news first broke, as was I.
Yeah, I'll tell you, part of the reason for that, that I've kind of changed a little bit, is, first of all, taking some time, breathing. We all need to breathe sometimes. I still think that a lot of the really bad outcomes are going to happen, and it's really scary. I do think movie theaters are going to be in some serious trouble, because even if Netflix is releasing stuff in theaters, even if they do relent a little bit on the windowing and all of that, I don't think it puts movie theaters in a good position to have an even bigger company than Netflix dictating terms on them when they're already in so much trouble. So, I, I'm not actually optimistic about any of this, but I think I've what I've seen over the last few days, especially after Paramount kind of sort of announced their hostile attempt, um, this won't actually be an easy merger to get through the regulators or through the industry, frankly. Um, I think it's notable that the DGA, more than just putting out a statement, actually said, we're going to go and meet with Netflix and express our concerns. Um, I think you get Christopher Nolan, again, president of the union, in a room with Ted Sarandos, and he's in no position to tell him not to buy Warner Brothers, but he is in a position to tell him, like, look, if you go through with this and you don't play ball with us on theatrical releases, we're going to make a rule at the Directors Guild that just says directors can't work for Netflix.
Do you think this is a different situation than when Disney bought Fox? Is this much bigger, in other words?
I think it's much, much bigger.
Okay.
I think with Fox, you were dealing with a studio that was dying, essentially.
Well, it was also a
And
studio buying a studio, you know.
and it was a studio buying a studio. So, the consolidation part of it is really bad. It is monopolistic. That deal should not have been allowed to go through. But the implications of it, especially in the context of the time that it happened, which was a few years ago now, it wasn't quite such an existential question as it is with Netflix. Again, especially because of what we've understood Netflix's business model to be until now. But if you have Christopher Nolan and the Directors Guild, if you have the Producers Guild, if you have, frankly, even the very corrupt Trump government essentially putting a bunch of rules on this acquisition, the acquisition might still go through. The monopoly power of it would still be horrible. But you could imagine that some of the worst fears that we have being kind of mollified a little bit. Just kind of like, things will be a bit better than the worst case scenario here.
If you can go just a little bit longer, I wanted to ask you a few more questions. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
sure. Go ahead.
Uh, let's say that Netflix doesn't get Warner Brothers and this hostile takeover bid happens with Paramount. Now, I'm not so sure that that's how it's going to play out,
Mhm.
But what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, then what you're talking about is the first of all, there's the political questions which are really troubling, like really troubling, um, unquestionably troubling. Uh, in terms of the studio operations, look, um, that puts you closer to a Disney Fox situation, even though in a funny way, Warner Brothers is the Disney in terms of scale, but it would be like Fox buying Disney. But the reason I say it's similar is that Paramount is not in a good position right now. This is, in fact, you know, if all Ellison wanted was CNN, he could make a deal to get CNN, right? And that's why I think that people who focus entirely on the political question about Warner Brothers are kind of missing the forest for the trees. He can't just get CNN. He needs to get the studio because Paramount has been flailing, right? Paramount just went through their own merger and are saddled with a bunch of debt. Their movies have been tanking at the box office. Um, they're not in a stable place. And what they see is like instead of dying, they just buy up Warner Brothers and then they would be a good functioning studio again. And I think that that is the case. Like that is essentially what would happen. You would have the Disney Fox situation where the fundamentals of the industry remain roughly the same. In that case, it was part of a shift towards streaming, but we're already there. So it's like, in fact, it would be less consequential in a sense. The consequence would be the consolidation. It would be, like David Ellison claims that like if they buy Warner Brothers, they're committed to 30 theatrical releases a year.
I
I
don't
don't
know
know
how
what
that is even possible.
I don't know how they would scale the production necessary. Like it's absurd. To the extent that they would do it, it would be like a bunch of low budget stuff that they put in theaters, like just to say they did. You know what I mean? That's not proper theatrical distribution. Um, so what you would be talking about is the loss of a studio. Uh, and that would suck. It would suck for the industry and it would suck for movie theaters. It would be bad. But I think it I think the implications or the potential implications of it are just less dire. Now, in terms of result, I'll admit I've been a bit, I've started to change my mind, not fully. I still think that overall Netflix is the worst of the options, but I'm starting to come around to the idea that Paramount is actually worse. And the reason the reason I feel that way is a bit less the fundamentals that we're talking about and more just the fact that um, Ellison's behavior has been desperate and strange. And
Well, is there even a question of whether this all would have happened if it wasn't for Ellison and his initial bid?
um, it might have, because I think that the moment that Zaslav opened up the idea that there would be a split, suddenly the assets become very tempting, you know. And it's very hard to, that especially when you go to the board and you go to shareholders and you say, hey, look, the split might work, but it might not. Whereas we can offer you a bunch of money right now. you know, the it, Warner Brothers was there's a high likelihood that it was going to be sold no matter what. Again, if there were laws, it wouldn't be, but there's no laws, or the laws are questionable. What concerns me with Ellison beyond the political is that kind of what amounts to crazy behavior.
I was
Um,
gonna say he seems like very almost like braggadocious or a lot of bravado in
well, it's a
everything.
very Trump way of doing things, and and the problem with the Trump way of doing things, as we've seen, is again, besides the fascism of it, is just like look at the tariff policy. It's all over the place. And you have industries that are halfway being stymied in the United States because never mind that the tariffs have gone up, they don't know day to day if the tariffs are going to change. Right. And when you have leadership like that, it doesn't augur well for the potential of the company. So I have a little bit of this feeling lately, like literally the last day or so, that on paper, the Paramount deal is like marginally less offensive to me. But the leadership in place is so bad that they could just buy, not only could you have consolidation, it could be consolidation that ends up tanking the company anyway. You know what I mean? Or if not tanking it completely, at least kind of like reducing its capacity. Whereas I don't, you know, if Netflix reduces capacity, it will have been a choice that they made to be monopolistic and crappy about it. But when you read Sarandos's words, he sounds like a much more serious person. He sounds like a person who's basically looked at his own business and said, you know, we have a lot of debt to service. Our subscription numbers, you know, are still growing to some degree and could still grow, but like who knows what the ceiling is. We need to start looking at other business models to take into our conglomerate.
Do you think that's why he's maybe done things like didn't Netflix just buy the Egyptian theater in California?
Look, they also own the Paris in New York. I don't when I see that stuff, all I see is a company that's essentially trying to butter up a bunch of creatives in an industry that doesn't like them.
Okay.
Nobody likes Netflix. Even the people working for Netflix, like the filmmakers working for Netflix, don't like Netflix. You see it all the time. You see it with like Ryan Johnson or who, all the people who sign deals with Netflix. It's like the only person who seems to just be like, yeah, this is awesome is David Fincher, you know, like everybody else.
Well, yeah,
Almost seems
I
like,
was gonna say it's crazy because I'm seeing everyone. I mean, Jane Fonda came out with a statement. I'm
yeah,
seeing like everyone from Hollywood who these are not like Trump fans, but they're like, please no Netflix.
yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah.
And I
And
mean, even people like James Cameron he said he would prefer Ellison. But yeah.
yeah, now, well, yeah. Uh, Cameron sometimes has funny opinions, but
Yeah, I'm
to
not
me,
saying he's necessarily right or wrong, whatever. Yeah.
no, but to me, it's more of a basic, like, you know, Noah Baumbach, who basically only makes movies for Netflix now. I don't think he's happy that he has to work for Netflix. I think he just looks at the lay of the land and goes, Netflix are the people who are giving me money to make Jay Kelly. Who the hell is giving anybody money to make Jay Kelly? Right? So, but Netflix does that in order to have Noah Baumbach so that despite Noah Baumbach maybe not being happy about working for Netflix, he still works for Netflix anyway. Right? That's so their plays to kind of like butter people up by like we're gonna release stuff and not just put movies in theaters, we're gonna like print them on film and like make it all fancy. That it's basically bullshit. Like that's just those are just
But
not
then
loss leaders, but no,
why
go
don't
ahead.
you feel that way about what Sarandos is saying now necessarily? You know, like you're saying he sounds like a
Oh,
serious business guy.
I
But yeah.
um that's a good question. I don't not feel that way about it. It's just that, especially in comparison to the way that Ellison has been talking and behaving, I'm like, wait a second. Sarandos actually seems like he's a more competent individual. And of course, it's not like, I mean, look, Netflix said that they would never do weekly releases. Now, they haven't really done weekly releases, but they've played around with the binge model a bit. You know, they're releasing Stranger Things over multiple parts, and they're doing things like that. They said that they would never do live television, and they've experimented with that. They said they never wanted to do sports, but they tried to get into sports. Were kind of denied it by Apple and some other companies. So it's not the craziest thing that like the reason that they were so anti movie theater for so long wasn't a particular antipathy to movie theaters. It was just that it didn't fit their business model and they didn't have a distribution arm. And so why would they want movie theaters to succeed? But if they own a company whose like whole thing is releasing movies in theaters, maybe suddenly they're like, actually, this is profit. And we have people who know how to do it. So great. Um, and some of the things that Sarandos has said sort of point in that direction. Now, he could be saying that just so that people like us and people more importantly in the industry say, "Oh, okay, maybe we can trust him." Like maybe that's what's going on here. But and I would, let's say, I would hedge that that's what's going on here. That even to the degree that he is kind of open to movie theaters, that he's still going to be like, well, if it comes down to our windowing, we're going to choose the windowing and we don't care about the theaters, right? Like all of the same things could remain true. But like I said, within the last day or so, I've had this slight change in my feeling where I'm kind of like, for as bad as it is, maybe just Ellison is a guy that you genuinely can't trust to just be a good CEO. Um, that's where I point to like Comcast, where it's almost like too bad Comcast dropped out of it because they seem to have their head on their shoulders. You know, like they seem to know what they're doing.
Was there a reason? What was your reasoning before this, though, for maybe saying Paramount wasn't the worst option?
I think it was just the nature of the monopoly, the size of the monopoly,
Okay. Okay.
in Netflix's case, and sorry,
Because
and
Paramount is much
also
smaller. Yeah.
because Paramount's smaller and less global in terms of the effects of them having a monopoly. Like it would still be a monopoly. Like you know what I mean? Like this is the crazy part of it is that we're nitpicking like which horrible monopoly would be worse than the
Yeah,
other.
yeah. We're we're
And
we're
and
we're, we're arguing over like which of the worst possible outcomes are the
yeah, and
best.
so then it just becomes a case of like, well, where are your values? Now, if I'm a person whose values are like the thing I care about most is that Trump and the Trump Republicans are consolidating political power and that this is part of it, then yeah, I Paramount would be by far the worst option. I just don't believe that that actually is the situation. In quite so dire terms. Whereas I do have more dire feelings about Netflix's ability to screw over movie theaters, to screw over television subscribers around the world, to screw over the Canadian media ecosystem. All of these kinds of things, Netflix raises more concerns for me, and still does. By the way, it's just that again, we don't know what will happen. And in either situation, there's a range of good and bad that could happen. And I'm starting to feel like even on the studio end, Ellison might be a troubling option. Just because he doesn't, I mean, a leader who's that desperate and that willing to like, I mean, what kind of thing is it to uh to slag the Netflix deal, launch a hostile bid, and then send a text message to David Zaslav being like, "Hey man, sorry this is all like playing out badly, but like I look forward to working." It's like, dude, you 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 just launched a hostile bid to take over his company. Like, what are you talking about? Um, it's like mafia stuff. That's why I compare it to Trump tactics, right? And that's just not how you, I mean, you can run a company that way, but that's not a company that runs effectively or efficiently or certainly with any kind of uh good feeling towards either labor or the consumer. Um and so I'm like I said, I'm starting to maybe change my tune on that specific thing where I'm looking at Netflix and going, if it's going to be one of these two between the guardrails that will likely be put on Netflix on their deal.
But why do you think there will be guardrails? Just because of the Directors Guild and the different guilds, or?
I don't think, no. I think the Trump administration will put guardrails on them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, Trump has already kind of indicated that, like, this would be a pretty big merger. Like, for as much as Trump is like an insane person, like he's not entirely unaware of the nature of these things, or frankly unaware, granted, it might be petty and personal, but like he knows that he can just give David Ellison carte blanche and David Ellison will be on board with whatever he wants. It's not clear with Sarandos. Sarandos will go and kiss his ass, as he already has done.
Right.
But
He
like
met
part
with
of
him in
it,
November. Yeah.
right. But part of the kissing ass, some of it might be ideological. Like some of it might be like, oh, okay, I'm going to promise to produce some conservative films too, or whatever. Who cares? Whatever. But part of it could be like a genuine material. We promise that HBO will be maintained as a separate service. That to the degree that we combine them at all, it will only be as like a bundled package. They could agree that like they could agree to terms that every asset that they are buying from Warner Brothers will necessarily be available to license by other companies. That's a huge thing, right? Because if Netflix owns the Warner Brothers library and puts it behind a wall, I mean, game over in terms of the consumer's ability to access stuff through any other source than Netflix. That's real monopoly.
Well,
right?
not any legal sources. I feel like bootlegging.
Well, okay, fine, sure, right.
I'm joking,
but yeah. But again, this is not just about ability to buy Blu-rays, right? For us, you can see behind me, there's a bunch of Blu-rays. That's important to me. But you're also talking about TV broadcast. You're talking about other streamers, right? Like if I'm another streamer, forget for a second the direct competitors like Disney or whoever. Think about like Criterion Channel. Criterion has sort of an arrangement with Warner Brothers where Janus stuff in the Janus Films library that Janus owns, Criterion, is on HBO Max, and in return, Criterion is able to license quite a few Warner Brothers titles, along with titles from other studios. They get a lot from Columbia because Sony is happy. Sony doesn't have their own streamer, so they're happy to license to whoever. If you have another studio with all of their library taken off the market, what does a company like Criterion do? Right now, I'm sure they'll find ways, they'll adjust, whatever. But that's just not a great situation. And
Arrow is another one. I think they have an exclusive deal with Warner Brothers, or some type of deal.
Some type of Arrow streaming or physical?
Arrow video
for the Blu-ray releases. Yeah. Like they've done a few Warner titles. There's been some of that. I think that's more overseas than here.
No, they're releasing stuff in the U.S. now too from the
That's Warner Brothers titles?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, okay, but look, but this is a perfect example then, because Warner Brothers they used to never license their stuff for home media. Or almost never. I think that the one major exception I remember is like here and there, and you'll still get them, is sometimes there'll be a box set of the Universal owned Hitchcock titles, and every now and then they will make some deal with Warner where North by Northwest is included in that because it was sort of part of that run, even though it wasn't at Universal. But other than that, like Warner Brothers was just like, we have a robust physical media distribution arm. We're not licensing to other people. But it was fine because, like, quite frankly, for the consumer, it didn't matter because just the Blu-rays, they were producing Blu-rays. They were coming out. It wasn't like Disney who's a bit more kind of tight about that stuff. Over time, the physical media has declined to a point where it's essentially a niche operation. And so Warner Brothers, even though they still produce a lot of titles, themselves has been more willing to say like, you know what, okay, we'll license to Criterion, we'll license to Arrow, we'll license to, if they're willing to put out, they just did Eyes Wide Shut with Criterion, right? They've done some other Kubrick with him too. They've done some other films with Criterion.
But doesn't Warner Brothers own, I have it somewhere here, the After Hours 4K the Criterion did. I think that was New Line or
Yes,
Warner Brothers.
that was, I forget the company, but it was, yes, it's a distribution is Warner Brothers. It's basically a Warner Brothers title.
Right.
There's some like funny stuff around that movie, but yeah, so all of which is to say that that that's useful because when a company is, if a company looks at their offerings or their, let's say their assets and goes, the market's too small, it's just not worth it for us to like give access to these things for people. Like we might as well just hold on to it and use it as just a slight enticement to our streaming service. That would be really bad. But instead what you've seen is companies able to convince Warner Brothers like, no, we can help you with this. And there's more revenue to be made. And the same thing applies to Netflix buying Warner Brothers, right? They might just naturally say like, hey, there's a lot of money to be made in selling our titles to other services. Like, Sony's making a whole business out of it.
Right. Or just licensing them. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean, licensing,
Okay. Yeah.
And so they might do that on their own. But what would be great is if the government said, you have to do it, right? Like that would be good. And by the way, that would also be a part of a situation that says like those are genuine subsidiary companies, right? They're not just like they're independently operated companies, not just all part of one synergistic enterprise to draw all of the money back to Netflix. How do you create an environment where the existence of a Netflix Warner Brothers, if it's allowed to happen, would still benefit the larger marketplace rather than consolidate and shrink it into their ownership? I could very much see a Trump administration, especially one who would otherwise be more favorable to Ellison, saying to Netflix, like, if you agree to as much as possible not operate like a monopoly, if we could put some guardrails on you, and then on top of that, the guilds and whoever, like, you could see a situation where it's not the end of the world. Like it's bad again in terms of the power dynamics and the monopoly and all of that, but it's not the worst monopoly you've ever seen.
What's the
And
hit? Not
yeah,
to interrupt you. I think I know where you're going. That it could have that we could avoid the worst possible,
yeah.
nightmare scenario. But what do you think the impact is going to be on consumers before we start wrapping up?
Look, I think the likeliest thing is there will be fewer movies made, certainly fewer movies made at a studio level with an aim towards genuine quality, which is something that Warner Brothers, you can see this last year, and they've had very big success with it, actually trying to make good movies. It's like somebody got in charge there. I mean, literally, some people got in charge there. Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi running the studio, going like, "What if we made our movies good? What if we
Well,
made
haven't they
movies that
made up
people?"
like 25% of the box office this year or something?
Yeah, they've done really really well, and they had some trouble spots. Like early in the year, Mickey 17 was a big flop, but like since then, it's basically just
Sinners, right?
Sinners, Superman, Minecraft was the one that started actually the run. Now, I don't think
Even
Minecraft
smaller
was.
one wasn't Weapons.
Weapons was huge because the budget wasn't so big and it made like a lot of money. One Battle After Another, big budget, so its profitability in theaters questionable, but like that movie will make money, and it's going to win a bunch of Oscars. So it also brings them prestige, which brings them talent, which brings them interest. There's a value in making quality product that people want. I thought that Minecraft was a bad movie, but it was what the kids who like Minecraft wanted, in a very real way, and they responded to it. Is Final Destination Bloodlines the greatest work of art ever? No, but it was like an amazingly kick-ass time in the theater.
John
And
Waters liked it a lot. I
yeah,
did
and
too.
that came from Warner Brothers going like, here's a property that we could reboot, but let's reboot it well, right? Like let's give people who like these movies the ultimate Final Destination movie. And part of the reason that they've shifted to quality is that, and also original films, uh, is that they have to sell them in movie theaters. There's a direct line to the consumer in terms of ticket sales. The consumer is buying that product, that film.
Do you,
Right?
by the way, do you think, I know you've addressed this elsewhere, but
Mm,
you and I have both seen the people saying, well, the movie theaters deserve to die. It costs too much, blah, blah.
yeah.
You know, I have to be honest, there are theaters that are very expensive around me.
Mm,
But I also have a theater here where it's $8 a ticket and I can just buy one popcorn and I'm fine. Me and my brother can go. I think
yeah.
that there's more expensive things we can be doing.
Going to the movies consistently, and it's still the case, is basically the cheapest outing you can have, that's ticketed. Almost anything else costs more. You want to go for dinner, it's probably going to cost you more. You want to go see a show, it's definitely going to cost you more. You want to go see sports, that's going to cost you way more. Uh, it, it, Basically anything that you do, movies are the cheapest form. The problem with movies is that you can also watch them at home. And so the value proposition becomes an issue. So I don't think the problem is that movie theaters themselves are specifically too expensive, although I think certainly in Toronto the prices could come down, or they could have more matinee pricing and that kind of thing. But like you guys in the States are lucky. You have like AMC A list and those kinds of things. We don't even have that. People there, you can subscribe for however much it is, $30 a month or something, and just go see basically unlimited movies. The value is incredible. And people who subscribe to those things, a lot of people don't know they exist, but the people who subscribe end up going a lot, right? And so I don't buy the idea in a vacuum that movies are too expensive. I think that the experience of going to the movies has become this really unfortunate, um, it's become this really unfortunate thing where the thing that's going to draw people is when you have something that feels like an event, right? Uh, Whether it's like Barbenheimer or Weapons, even as an example, where people are just like, you got to see this in a theater because it's like crazy and people react in fun ways and it's just a fun time. It's like being at a show, right? Not every movie is going to do that to you. Now, I believe that every movie is better in a theater. You know what I mean? I believe that, in fact, the small drama that's really, really intimate with a lot of close-ups is benefits more from a movie theater than the biggest blockbuster because it traps you in the room and it forces a kind of intimacy, a socialized kind of intimacy. And, that's my feeling as a person who cares about art. But we're talking about a commercial entertainment. And so, you have a shift in theaters towards these event screenings, while at the same time, the actual quality of the theatrical experience has gone way down. Part of that is the pricing. People take the pricing as part of quality. They're like, why am I paying so much? My TV at home is very nice. That's a quality argument, not really a price argument. So that's why IMAX is doing really well in theaters. because people understand that means quality. I'm getting something I can't get at home. Okay, how do you build an experience that makes clear to people that even when it's not IMAX, you're getting something you can't get at home? I start going off on issues, even basic things, like the fact that movie theaters don't mask their screens anymore. So, when you're watching something that's a 235 widescreen movie, it's got black bars on the top and bottom like your TV at home. And most people who go into a theater, especially at this point, young people, don't even know that masking used to exist, so they don't know the difference necessarily, but it makes the picture on screen look worse. And it also makes it kind of look like your TV, but worse. Like if you have an OLED TV, it literally looks nicer than the movie theater screen. And I would look at encouraging studios to participate much more in community building type things, not just one-off event screenings, but ways of working with theaters to develop more community-oriented things so that people feel like they don't necessarily need a giant event to draw them to a theater. It's enough that it's like the thing that they go do because they go out and socialize with people. One of the things that you hear from people when they complain about when you're having this kind of debate about the value of movie theaters, you'll say like movie theaters is a social experience. Now, you and I think, would agree just with that completely. But a lot of people sort of rightly point out that, like, well, when you're in a theater, you're not supposed to be talking to other people. And when we do talk to people, people complain about it. So how social is it really? I think that that's a narrow way of understanding what a social experience is. But it is true that other ticketed events, you can talk to your neighbor, or many events, like even at a concert, you can kind of have a little bit of a conversation with the person you're with, or you can meet people, or you can, you're running through a crowd. Like people understand the value of that better. If you could somehow build that more into the movie theater experience, like a lot of the rep cinemas have been able to do, then
How have
you're off
those
to the
rep cinemas
races.
been able to do that?
Um, I think I think that there's two things that have gone on. I think that they've capitalized on quite frankly the letterboxed generation. So a lot of kids who are getting into movies, they go on letterboxed. They log movies, but they also find out about movies on letterboxed. And a lot of people on letterboxed, it's sort of like a social contagion thing. It's like people will be like, I just saw this old movie on 35 millimeter. And then you have a bunch of young people who are like, I've never even seen 35 millimeter. Like, I don't even know what that is. Let me go see what this is. And then they go out to the theater and they have a great time because somebody introduces the movie and there's people and it's packed and people are excited and it creates that value. Now, the second part of it, is something that developed, it sort of grew out of Cinematech culture. Uh, but I think really kind of, I have a theory that it really kind of had its ground here in Toronto. So, somebody maybe who does research on this could dispute this, but we had a theater in Toronto. I mean, technically still exists, but during the pandemic, they sort of started using, essentially it's basically just a live theater, like they do rentals for live performance. Every now and then somebody will rent it to screen a film. It's a theater called the Royal. It's in Little Italy here. Wonderful theater, old single screen theater. I don't know, like 100 years old or so, maybe a bit less. um they were showing mostly second run and first run kind of independent stuff. And at some point in the years leading up to the pandemic, um, kind of drawing on some of the energy that had existed through association with film festival programmers and stuff like that, um, you started having programmers taking over the Royal for monthly series. One of them is a series that's still going called Neon Dreams. That kind of is what it sounds like. It's a lot of like neon drenched movies from the 80s, 70s, and 80s. Um, Although it's kind of expanded beyond that a bit. They're showing Zodiac on 35 millimeter, or maybe they just showed it. I think, oh no, they're showing it this Friday. That's not exactly a neon movie, but the but the point is they were able, through not just hosting movie screenings, but kind of making it a monthly event led by a specific programmer who has specific taste, who's going to show you things in a specific vein. And so then you start being able to trust that programmer. So when at first he's screening stuff that you've heard of, great, it draws you out. And then you start going like, oh man, this month he's showing something like I've never heard of. Since the pandemic, he's been operating out of the Review. And the Review, essentially, they used to do second run and first run indie. They still do a little bit of first run indie and a little bit of second run. But primarily now they're a rep cinema. And some of it is just rep screenings that are just happening. But a lot of it are these kind of programmed monthly events. And, what that leads to is, he brings in a print of the concert documentary A Music War that like literally before the movie was starting, I was walking around talking to people being like, have you heard of this movie? And like maybe like two people had heard of it. That was a packed screen. It was sold out, right? How do you sell out a screening of a movie nobody's ever heard of? That's community, right? That's and even the fact that I was going and talking to people in the theater.
I was gonna say that when I go to the Sunray, every so
Yeah.
often they'll bring in Joe Bob Briggs, and Joe Bob Briggs, who's big on Shutter now, and
Yep.
used to do, for people that
Yep.
don't know, he used to do Monster Vision on TNT. I mean, he comes in and he presents the movies. I think he even does a lecture at times, and it
Mm-hmm.
it like
Mm-hmm.
brings people together. I was
Mm-hmm.
talking with people before the movie showings.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, the Review has any number of programs, and those programs reflect the interests and style of the programmer. So it's human, right? It's human curation delivered in a human way. Brendan, when he does Neon Dreams, he presents the movie. He often has trivia games or whatever. He gives out stuff. He sells merch. Um, other programmers, he has a partner, Alicia Fletcher. She's an amazing film historian. She does silent review. They show silent films, often accompanied by a pianist, depending on if the movie has a soundtrack or not. And you know, she's doing these amazing screenings. The demographic is a little bit different, skews a little bit older, but those screenings sell out. There's another programmer who does a series called Natalie Atkinson. She does a series called Designing the Movies. She does lectures before the films about the design work in those films. That has its own audience, its own community of people who go out regularly. Like, one of the parts of this, I mean, now we're really heading off on a tangent, but one of the parts of this is in my opinion, is reserved seating has been a disaster. Reserved seating is, again, a sop to convenience. Now, for me, it's wonderful. I live within walking distance of a few different theaters downtown Toronto. I often wait to buy my ticket like right before showtime so that I can sit away from other people in my reserved seating scheme. And I'll literally show up to the movie while the trailers are playing. Like I'll leave my house at the start time of the movie and arrive. Now, for me, that's convenient. I have more time to do the things that I like and whatever, and I show up and I have a seat and it's great. But then I think back on like how I grew up going to the movies, and it's like, we used to have, like, I don't know, like on opening day, it was busy. And you understood that it was busy because there were lineups at the box office. And the reason there were lineups was because people needed to get their seat, the good seat. And so that creates a bit of drama and investment in the thing that you're doing. It's not just, I'm going to go see a movie and whatever. It creates an actual feeling of like, whoa, there's value happening here. When you go to the review, they do not have reserved seating. Even when there's lineups all the time out the door. That signals to people that there's something worth doing there, right? It brings more people into the community spirit of it. And to me, to bring it back to the Netflix of it, one of the things that disturbs me about Netflix specifically and just the streaming model generally is that it is about atomization. It is not about community.
Can I be honest? I think it's bigger than
Yeah.
Netflix. I just feel like Silicon
No, no,
Valley
no.
in general wants to disrupt human life.
100%. 100%. I mean, this is the Silicon Valley mindset. It's everything is about convenience. And the thing about convenience is that convenience is individual, right? It's the reason we talk about, for example, car dependency, right? How do you break people's car dependence? Cars are expensive. They kill people. They're bad, right? But if you have a car, man, that's the most convenient shit in the world. Like you can go wherever you want, right? Like how do you beat that? You know? And the way that you beat it is that if you can't match it on convenience, you have to come somewhat close, but you also have to offer other things. And so for example, in Toronto, because the traffic is so bad, having a car isn't actually the most convenient thing. Biking has become huge, right? And so we have a bike share system that's owned publicly, like by the city. It's amazing. And then what do you have? Well, instead of having every individual person in a car, you have cyclists who are out and about, who are actually they don't have a car around them. They're in the world. They stop and talk to people. They frequent local shops because it's easy to just park your bike. Though those, I'm not against convenience. I love that things are convenient, right? So much of our world is better because we've technologically been able to make things convenient for us and easier to do. But I think that especially when we're talking about these companies whose only financial interest, essentially, is to make things as convenient as possible so that they can skip all of the middlemen and just extract money from you. And in fact, the products that they're selling are not even what they're selling, right? Like what does Netflix actually sell you? You as a consumer look at it and go, I'm, I guess, buying access to like a library of content and new shows and stuff. And the product is good, so maybe I pay for it. That's not how Netflix looks at it. They don't care about any individual show, right? They are, it goes to what Chris Hayes talks about, right? Like the thing to them, the issue is attention, right? The issue is, can they lock us on our couch and have us watching only Netflix? And then we're going to pay them, they'll be able to raise subscription prices to the moon. But what are we going to do? Complain because movie theaters don't exist anymore and I just want to be able to sit on my couch and watch stuff. I think it's dangerous for a society to go in that kind of direction. I don't think it's bad that Netflix exists. I just think that these things need to exist in balance. I don't think that movie theaters and movie theater distribution needs to exist in the same way that it currently does. The multiplex model, I think in many ways was a disaster. It's part of how we got here. Unfortunately, we can't change that. The movie theaters that exist are multiplexes. So how do we transform those spaces into spaces that have real value to people, that can connect people to art and to each other? Have you seen Hamnet yet?
No, I haven't.
So, I mean, people have opinions about that movie. I really liked it. But one of the beautiful ideas in that movie is the idea that some things are so difficult to express, especially for certain people, that art becomes the vehicle to express those things. But more important than that is the way in which people collectively in an audience can all then witness that art, that expression, and find something in it that they connect to, that then very literally connects them to the people around them and to the artists on stage. And again, that is society. Society isn't only that, but that is fundamentally what society is about. And when I raise concerns about monopolies or the specific actions of Netflix or whatever, ultimately that's what I'm concerned about. For me personally, it would suck if movie theaters disappeared. It's my favorite thing in the world to do, right? But who am I, right? I'm just a guy. If nobody else wants to go to movie theaters, what am I supposed to say? I can't sustain them on my own. Maybe if I was rich, I would build one myself, and I would just screen stuff for myself, but I'm not. So yes, that personally affects me. To me, the bigger issue is simply that I think that we have movie theaters now. They do still, to some degree, act as a space that allows that kind of community and society forming to happen. And I think that should be preserved. If we can, and these things, these mergers and these corporate shenanigans, they artificially create a scenario where these things can't continue. If people's tastes just changed, then I guess we couldn't complain, but that's not really what's happening. It's not just because people's taste changed that movie studios decided it was more worth it to spend, $2 billion making 5 different movies that they release in a year, rather than spending $2 billion or maybe even just spending $1 billion and making 20 movies or 30 movies. Those are choices that they made. And they're choices that then lead people to go like, I didn't even know they release comedies in theaters anymore. So why would I go see one in a theater? It's like a Ouroboros,
Right. Snake eating
but
its
that's
own
the
tail.
nature of monopoly, right? Like that's the whole danger of monopoly, is that it's an Ouroboros.
I think that's the point that you've wanted to drive home here is
Yeah.
monopoly is the issue.
Yeah. 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 It's the specific details are issues, they're material. The labor implications are huge. You're talking about potentially thousands of layoffs as a result of this. Those are people's livelihoods. That's extremely real. But again, that's all part of what amounts to an antisocial attitude by these corporations. Corporations don't exist to bolster society. That's not why they
No, they
exist.
exist to maximize the profits of shareholders.
Yes.
I mean, in a
The
way,
go-
it goes beyond just the issue of like everyone will say, well, it's the CEO. It's also just the
No,
structure of these
it's the
corporations.
whole structure and how they've been allowed to operate, right?
Right.
These are rules, corporations only exist because the government allows them to. That's a fact. Government is who is defining the boundaries of society, right? Unfortunately, government has ceded a lot of that to corporations. So corporations, in fact, define our reality, right? They shouldn't, but they do.
Right.
They don't have to, right? And that's why I also pull back to the thing of like the most upsetting part about all of this is that Warner Brothers doesn't need to be sold to begin with. You know, if Warner Brothers was literally about to go bankrupt and they had to sell, I guess I would just be like, well, I guess it is what it is. But they're not. They could survive on their own very easily. And yet it's almost certainly not what's gonna happen. And there's no reason for that. There's just no reason except for the expected greed of corporate entities, you know. And I guess the CEOs who stand to make and board members who stand to like make healthy bonuses, you know.
Well, I think we'll have to leave it at that. I kept you longer than expected.
Yeah. I
Anything?
mean,
What?
look, we could go forever on this. It's
Right. Anything you want to say in closing, or anything that I missed?
No, I mean, I think we covered it. The one thing I will say, and this is to anybody who's listening, if you care about movies or art or culture or society, frankly, but let's say movies. Let's say you care about movies. Go see them in a theater. Don't just go see them in a theater. Take your friends to see them, right? Buy them the ticket. Like, don't make them pay. You know what I mean? Just be like, I'm going to treat my friend to a movie and remind them how fun it is to go, right? Remind people that there's value in going out and experiencing the world, that witnessing art is part of that, that sitting on your couch is a nice facsimile sometimes, but it's not a substitute. I don't know that will save anybody in the end, but like, I think that in our own small ways, we've allowed ourselves to kind of be pushed by the tides or carried by the currents. And as much as possible, even in small individual actions, we should be pushing against those. And that's part of how you do it. I've been thinking about it in other ways. Like, I go to the movies a lot. I don't go to enough live music. And certainly in Toronto, live music is quite threatened. I should go more. It would be easier if I had friends who took me, but I'll try to motivate myself. But I know that with movies, I can drag friends to go see stuff. It's important to do.
Well, thank you again, Corey Tad, for coming on Parallax Views.
Thank you for having me. It's really fun. I mean, it's my favorite thing to do is just talk about this shit.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.